Hello, everybody. Welcome back to an episode of Zeus with Bruce. Today, I have an incredible guest with me, a good friend of mine, Kodah Pipitone.
Hey,
How are you, my friend?
Doing good.
Okay,
Good
so thank you. This conversation is going to be very free-flowing. Kodah, for me, is a source of wisdom, source of knowledge. And for us here at Zeus with Bruce, we like to combine theory and also practice. And I believe Kodah has the two of them. So just to begin, introduce yourself. What should the audience know about you before we get deep in?
Sure. So Kodah Pipitone, grateful to be here, dropping in with my brother Bruce. And in the world, I operate under a consultancy called Emergent Intelligence, which deals with frontier infrastructure, deep technology, and commercializing that so the legacy of our species is optimal. That looks like consulting with the Flow Genome Project, which I'm sure we'll go into more. And that's Jamie Wheel's work, and we're bringing that to corporations for team leadership operating systems from the boardroom to the backcountry. I'm working with Gina Health, which is a plant-based liposomal supplement company. It's the future of healing. Your body can do so much if we just properly support it.
So true.
And in a conversation with some publicly traded clean technology development funds on how to commercialize those vehicles. So before Emergent Intelligence and this larger scale entrepreneurship, I was a serial entrepreneur first in cooperatives, cafe, restaurant, event space in Baltimore City called Red Emma's Worker Cooperative. I learned a lot about owning a business at a young age. Then I went to activism, politics. I'm sure we'll get into that, social justice frame, victims, hierarchies of oppression, all this.
But all the words I like to
hear. But I got really activated on building better tools for social workers to help more people. I built a software company in homeless services called Host Home Inc.
Can you go into that, homeless services?
Yeah. Well, we can go to that and just give you the run. And after that, I did a wearable device design firm on these biometrics of well-being. So people are not in their houses because they're actually not in their bodies. So the next mission was to help people be more embodied. So we built this jewelry with wellness sensors and things. Super fun, but the pandemic made it very hard to raise capital for a hardware startup. So that didn't go too far. And then I moved into the psychedelic therapeutics investment space. Really did a lot of diligence and research in that space, and ended up taking that thesis and partnering with a fund of funds to do AI and biotechnology investments into vintage funds. So that was a whole learning and networking experience. It took me all over the world. And so that's really what you need to know professionally. But the undercurrent of all that was a journey of embodiment that was fueled by ceremonial plant medicines and deep study in world religions. And we have the guest speaker today. This is Bart.
Although short for Bartholomew, which I thought it was Bart Simpson. So that just goes to show a little bit of a disconnect. But a man of the people.
And Bart is I'm the uncle of Bart. I'm not his primary person. So this person's Noah, and Noah will come by after the podcast and take Bart away.
This is good.
Bart, So we can dive in on any of those threads, but I think that the personal journey is really the current that pushed me towards what my mission is. And as that personal journey evolved with going into identity community, going into the transgender community, and then coming back into masculinity and men's work, there's just these what look like pivots, but really are refining of what I'm really here to do. And as I deprogrammed and reprogrammed those ideologies, I found myself more in integrity with each transformation, more in alignment with each transformation, and ultimately more conviction because I'm more integrated.
Would you say that, because it's interesting, especially you were saying just transgender and then all that stuff.
Yeah.
Would you say that sometimes when we're trying to get from, let's say we're making a metamorphosis, that in the journey we may need to make not a mistake, but we may need to go through something that actually at the time we think makes a lot of rational sense, which it does. People have a lot of regret saying, oh, I feel so bad for the decision I made at that time. You're operating with the information you had, so is it really a bad decision? Maybe the outcome wasn't great.
Yeah.
For yourself, do you feel like that's a necessary point that people need to experience? Can you bypass tragedy or challenge in order to arrive at triumph?
For sure. I love that. Bypassing tragedy to arrive at triumph. Well, I believe we are all in the dojo of our choosing. We're all signing up for the crucible of our lives, and life is having a human experience through us. So without getting into the word salad of all that, I think as I'm climbing up the mountain here in my career and life, I was a quote unquote do it alone motherfucker. I was like, I'm going to just do this myself. And then, maybe I don't know if there was dark triad personality, narcissism, egotistical startup founder archetype. I can change the world. And in many ways on the microphone, people did listen, respond, and act based on the things that I was saying. So maybe I did believe that I could do it all alone. But it was really when I started getting mentors that I started expanding a bit. And if I had to look back and advise my younger self, I would recommend to be open to those mentors earlier, because you're getting all of their wisdom, you're getting their navigation, and there might be a different route up that mountain. Mm-hmm. So I had to really get the value of mentorship by going without mentors for a moment.
So the absence of them helped you appreciate the value of them.
Right.
Yeah, that's really true. It's like the absence making the hardcore founder.
Yeah.
You don't appreciate it if it's not there. And like you're speaking about the mountaintop, if you are able to get to the mountaintop, but in a different way, if that other way you take is less arduous, it's quicker, it's easier, can you really embody the lessons and the wisdom that's there in the same way?
Right. I don't think you can, but I don't believe that I can know that that's wrong. So to have a mentor guide you towards the cleaner route earlier, yeah, I won't get that experience of hardship. I won't habituate the discipline to overcome and move through it, but I'm sure I will encounter another challenge on the clear path, and I will habituate those skills later. So this is kind of the conversation with people around mental health and using pharmaceuticals to stabilize their mental health. Well, they're not going to learn the kind of offline, navigation of psychological volatility if you're in a sober state, right? If you're always numbing with a psychotropic or a SSRI, you're not learning how to fly those highs and lows. But there are subtler distinctions that you would then learn. So if we suddenly put bumpers up on the bowling alley so we're not getting gutter balls when we roll, when we try to get a strike, well, maybe we're going to learn the nuances of how to spin and get the precise strike instead of leaving one hanging in the corner. Maybe we're going to refine what we're actually here to do. So I don't devalue or critique anybody who is blunting the edges of the journey, because I think that there is just as much insight in the subtlety. And I don't believe we are at the full expression or the crescendo of this epoch of humanity. I think there's a lot of nuance for us yet to refine. So I don't know that it's necessarily required that we all retread those same hardships when we have tools that can numb them or manage them more effectively. I personally have chosen to go raw, like to feel it all and to feel the fire and to feel the pain and to experience it firsthand. Someone told me the fire was hot and I didn't listen. I touched the fire and got burned, and now I know it's hot.
Do you need to touch the fire to know it's hot?
That's what we're asking, right?
I think you kind of, to a way, you don't need to. However, if you want to derive your own personal wisdom and story in a way, I think you might have to. Like, for example, you don't need to jump in front of a bus to know it's probably going to hurt.
Yeah.
Right? But then, I have a friend who I grew up with. It was crazy. This kid, he would get in so many accidents, but he would never get hurt. He was riding his bike down a hill. A car literally ran him over, got up without a scratch. Right? And now he has a story that he can actually supplement with that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely would say I got hurt. And the sources of my pain, self-generated, right? I'm a full agent in it, but I have a lot of intellectual gifts. My grandfather on my mom's side designed the lunar module for the Apollo mission, so we landed on the moon due to his work.
Oh, nice.
And this high engineering brain, and all of the children, all of the men are doctors and lawyers, and my mom worked in a research lab at Johns Hopkins, so a lot of intellectual horsepower. And then my father's side were Italian immigrants as well, and they were entrepreneurs. Social intelligence, real estate. They were trading horses.
When you say social intelligence, do you mean the implementation of it or the study of it, or both?
I would say both.
They're not exclusive.
When my grandfather would have parties with his men's club, the Dolce Vita, in Baltimore, Maryland, and all the Italian entrepreneur men would come together, he was like the VIP. He was the guy that everybody looked to. And he knew everybody, and he knew something about everybody, and he knew everybody's families. So he was just really good at that politicking in entrepreneurial communities. And so I kind of came with both of those capacities. So what then I did when I got back from traveling the world after undergrad and 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 looking for how to apply myself. We can get into why I was looking in these areas, but I was looking at oppressed communities, socioeconomic injustice, and in inner cities in Baltimore is ground zero for that. And I was looking in that there's a high degree of LGBTQ and then transgender. So I was looking at that even before I was identifying with that and thinking how I could help. So I began essentially politicking and then innovating. So my brain got really clear on the ideologies, the frameworks, and the technologies. And I wasn't really sourcing from self as to what I wanted. I was externally referencing what I thought should be.
The environment was telling you.
Yeah. So then I ended up making changes to my body to align with that externally referenced mission. And I essentially dragged my body through the hard things until I ultimately couldn't even feel what I personally wanted or personally liked, because I was so established in doing what I thought one ought to want. Right. Yeah. I was a startup founder. I was a transhumanist.
What's the age range for these?
24 to 28, 29. Okay. I was essentially like very cool in the social justice and tech startup scene, and I didn't know who I was.
Wow, you were everybody but yourself.
Yeah.
Whew. Powerful. Yeah, because it's like also the adoption of identity.
Yeah.
And figuring out at what point did you decide, okay, now I'm going to be this. Is it a continuous flow of your character developing, or like you have that experience where you're in Baltimore and you see things happening, then you adopt what's happening there, right? A lot of people, they believe in one way to understand poverty, they need to they themselves actually be poor.
Yeah.
In a way to actually hear it, but in a way, yes, in a way, no. Right? It's like, do you know what it's like to not be able to, or to not know where your next payment is going to come from for rent?
Yeah, so I definitely put on poverty because I wanted to increase my empathy, and that's not right. That's savior complex in a lot of ways. And there's also another fuel in that was rebelliousness in your 20s. That's your parents are wrong, society's wrong, make them wrong. One day you'll see that we're right. And this is rapture ideologies. We can go into this later, but this is very common. Like when setting out on our own, individuating from our family of origin, we create that space and we go all the way over here, and then later the prodigal son returns home.
Prodigal son returns. So the Bible always finds someone in these conversations. Yeah. It's powerful, and it actually reminds me of this idea. I'd love to touch upon this because the relationship with the parents and our identity, how it expands. When we're born, our parents, if we're lucky enough, or if we're fortunate enough to have both of them, our parents are the gods in our life, right? Yeah. They supply us with protection. They provide for us. They're our God in a way. When we're children, or even could be young adults, we idolize our parents because they're the figures that, if we have a healthy relationship, we idolize them. And then during the rebellious aspect of it, 20s, late teens, 20s, we then demonize them. Right? So we go from idolizing our gods, then we demonize our gods, and then later on, I believe when we actually age, we begin to humanize our gods.
I love that.
That's such a beautiful spectrum that it goes on. And I think that's the same with, we're going to go to this as well, similar to even religious aspects, even teachings, even if you believe in whatever ideology, whether it's conservative or liberal, any of these aspects, we're born into this. Our rebellious nature and our tendency to want to find self-identity challenges it, so then we demonize it after we idolize it. But then later on, we realize, if we're perspicacious enough, we realize, we actually don't have all the answers. Let's then humanize it.
Yeah. So that process for me of humanizing my family of origin began to take place, and then unlocked a lot of alignment that I didn't even know was there because I wasn't open to it. When I went deeper into personal development. So I had been working with Viharika and Sato Daime and this indigenous frames around having ecstatic experiences and really finding my church. We can talk about what that was like, because I had done a semester of seminary, studied world religions in college.
I want to get into
traveled the world, and my father was a little bit like, I love you, but he's kind of white knuckling, holding on to the relationship. Like, hey, are you spiritually grounded in the community of faith? And I was, exploring. Now I understand that's a walkabout. And when I came back from a ceremony that was near my family's farm, and went to visit on the Sunday morning after ceremony, and the family had just gotten back from Catholic church, and I was telling them about the ceremony, and my dad got like, oh, I just went to church.
Oof,
right?
what
He
is
got
a church?
he
Yeah.
got that I had
Yes.
found a church of my own flavor, and he then felt much more comfortable as a parent relating to me, in that he knew I wasn't adrift in the spiritual milieu of the culture anymore, and I'd found something that was real. And we've really developed a relationship since then around spiritual and faith-based conversations. But the question of humanizing was simultaneous to that, where I did Landmark Forum. I went all the way through, their curriculum into the ILP, which is the leadership program, and in that you complete with your parents, which basically says, thank you for raising me, thank you for all these things I got from that, and then owns all the stuff that didn't get, right? Humans are flawed in so many ways, so owns all the areas.
This is a part of the transition from, let's say, adolescence into adulthood.
Yeah.
Right, like it's kind of that ritual aspect, and we do, if you're okay with it, talking
Yeah.
about the ritual with
Yeah.
the chest.
Yeah.
But even then, we've lost a lot of that in the culture, right? So in like Judaism, you would have the bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah, right? In Christianity, there's typically the baptism, and all these other forms of the transition from the adolescence of the kind of the dependency to then becoming the independent adult, but having that ceremony. A lot of people don't have that ceremony.
Yeah.
If you live in major cities in the U.S. or even around the world, in impoverished cities, you'd have this initiation to a gang.
Yeah.
So they take many different forms. However, the absence of it is, in my opinion, definitely doing a lot of destruction, because we do need to transform, right? It's like that transforming state into our next level that we have. And not many people, I would say less than 1%, would have your experience that you had. For me, I believe the one you talked about was a transformation.
Yeah.
Would you share that one?
Sure.
Very powerful.
So let's what you're referring to is Sundance, since the Lakota ceremony.
Yep.
And we can go in a little bit. So with once I complete with the parents, then it transforms over to adults relating sovereign. I'm accountable for my life, you're accountable for your life, and we can be friends with this family of origin tie biologically, which then opened up like a lot of, hey, they see what I'm doing professionally, and they had some relationships they could bring. They respected me more as a professional and creating value in the world, and they felt comfortable introducing me to some of their friends who I didn't even know they had that were in the industry that I was in. So that all unlocked after I really got present to owning my share of my childhood and thanking them for their participation and guidance in that. Around that time, I was building out the fund around consciousness, mostly psychedelics, mental health, and looking at transformational tech. So you go into San Francisco, there's a Trans Tech Conference, Nicole Bradford, all these transpersonal psychology, the supplements, pharmaceuticals, and devices that enable healing, essentially. It's like biohacking hardware and supplements. So there's a whole community around this in San Francisco and LA, and I was in that. This community integrated my Western frame around the indigenous medicines I've been working with. And when I started to deepen the work with the tribes, I ultimately was invited to go to the Ashaninka and live with them. I did a long retreat for almost 2 weeks.
Where is that at?
In Acre, Brazil.
Oh, Brazil.
Uranka Tassaransi Center. Yeah. And then from there, I was invited to the Yawanawa and the Lakota. So the Yawanawa are a little bit more integrated with the West. They do a lot more trade, and they have this sacred village where you go deep into ceremony. And I did a retreat there, it lasted almost a month. And then I came out and worked with the Lakota. This is after I'd stopped doing transness. I stopped really doing gender and started doing human.
So this is when you detransitioned?
Yeah. Okay. So I was not injecting any estrogen anymore. I had scheduled surgery to remove my breast implants and had begun to reintroduce testosterone and then retrain masculinity. After having trained authentic relating, nonviolent communication, I started to actually come back into polarity and assertiveness and less agreeableness, as we can kind of poke at.
The ocean, sort of like the frame of,
So this is all the build up to then I got invited to dance with the Lakota. And the Lakota nation is a long history with the U.S. They're the only nation to ever beat the U.S. military head on. And they did that at the Battle of Wounded Knee, and they later got defeated in the whole engagement, but they did win a battle. And this is First Nations, indigenous, this is Indians versus cowboys, and they, bow and arrows and horseback versus rifles, and somehow the Lakota warriors won. Well, how was this initiation? And it's to balance the polarity of women bleeding in childbirth, women bleeding every month in menstruation. What can men do? Well, masculine is that discipline, being where you say you'd be, when you say you'd be there, ready to go. So the men commit to a 4-year process of doing the vision quest and then doing this 4-day sun dance, which is no food, no water, dancing all day, every day, and doing the super hot saunas in the morning and night. So to imagine like waking up, doing the sauna called temescal, going and dancing in the sun all day, and then going and doing another temescal.
This is in Brazil, right?
And this one is actually taking place in Mexico. And it's also in the Dakotas and South Dakota and whatnot.
It's during the summer?
It's in the summer.
Oh, so yeah,
it's very hot, yeah. And on the last day, there's an offering of flesh that happens, and it's a little bit more sensitive to talk about. And I actually don't like talking about too much because like it's not something I want to, I don't want to be known as, but it's something that I think as far as initiation, it makes your word matters. Like if you don't complete 4 years, the man who sponsored you completes your 4 years for you. So it's like they're literally on the hook if you don't.
Pun intended.
Yeah,
I guess, or maybe no pun.
So, and it definitely brings about a near-death experience in psychology, and then you encounter a part of yourself that you've been protecting yourself from. So I encountered a part of me that's able to do that, which is a similar part of me that's probably able to kill and defend and bring up a lot of fire to do that thing because it's really hard and your animal feels like it's trapped and you have to release. And now I'm in touch with that part of myself. So now I have to up level my discipline and understand there's a code of honor around that part of me. So I don't I used to play football and have that space where you could smash, go full out. Now as an adult male, I'm not playing competitive sports. What is the role of that? Well, there's protecting, there's generating that energy in business to have conviction and drive forward on our initiative. And there's also the knowing that I can go there actually allows me to create more safety and security for those around me. And there are other men, so it's very different if you're in London or New York where there's no firearms versus if you're in Texas where people are open carrying. And in Texas, I find it's actually because that people who are trained and licensed to deploy technology that can be violent, but it's stabilizing and grounding. Like we're not playing around here. Like we are fully human, which means our full human animal is able to go there and therefore can care very deeply.
So you're saying that none of it is actually, to maybe say push underneath the rug. It's very present. The ability to actually do some kind of damage to its max. And a lot of times when you're suppressing it, there's a certain medium that it would need to be released on. And I think it's a challenge. You were saying with football, it's a lot of people say, what's the value of a lot of the sports as we get older? It's in a way organized warfare.
Yeah,
right? And it's very primal for men specifically to want to release that. But in a civilized society, society can change, but our Paleolithic brains, they don't change as fast. So how do we adapt it, like you're saying?
Exactly, and we don't shut it down. You shut it down or repress it, it's going to come out in some weird taboo or kink or something. Right? Look at the instances of porn addiction. Look at how men treat their penises in masturbation. And that's where that human animal is expressing because we're trying to tame it and like put a screen in front of our eyes and try to. But it's like actually there's a role, a healthy, honorable expression of that in the world, which is why the military exists. It's not because we can't establish peace in the world. It's because we need a place for that element of society to express with honor. And it's not a painful experience. I haven't served in the military, but many of my friends have. And I understand like there's an aspect of the male human that some females have too, but there's an aspect of masculinity and humanity that needs some arena or theater to express with honor. And I don't know that it's right to eradicate that element of our species and try to put on an artificial pacifism when we're literally violently chewing up plants to digest and metabolize energy. So we are full. Life gives life, right? Ethically, and plants give themselves to animals. Animals give themselves to other animals, and we are an animal. So to cut off from that circle of energy and life and transformation, I think is actually there's some moral implications of that. And I'm not saying we go around killing each other, but I am saying we have an aspect of ourselves that is this. and it's important to be aware and be in relationship with that aspect so it doesn't express in unexpected ways.
I like what you said about the artificial pacifism, and it reminds me of this quote, I believe it's by E.O. Wilson, and he says that we have Paleolithic brains with medieval institutions and godlike technology. Yeah, I was thinking about this one, and I believe it relates so much to that because there's that primal aspect of ourselves, institutions that we developed from the primal aspect, but then now that haven't been adapted in a modern sense. And then now there's a lot of idealism, a lot of this, like you said, artificial pacifism, where it's like, oh, yeah, full abundance and full peace. Yes, we do want this. However, how do we channel a certain energy? And of course, we don't need to go out and be militarily violent or do anything like that. And of course, there's a place for you need to defend yourself and all these things.
Yeah.
But if you take that out, it's the same thing in, I would say, in more of the feminine energy.
Yeah.
If you take away the feminine energy, their ability to express with communication and their ability to really dive deep into their emotions in that sense, in a collective, you are robbing them of an experience. And if you even look at the playground in, let's say, in elementary school or in high school, even if you don't instruct them, what's going to tend to happen is that the boys are going to play in these sports where there needs to be some kind of winner because there's an establishment of like a hierarchy and a competitive nature. Within the girls, they're more likely to just find, it's like, okay, we both win.
Yeah.
It's sort of like that kind of compromise element.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hard psychology on this that could be useful to point to, but just for the accessibility to audience and whatnot, the male developmental cascade from the semen inseminating the egg, the genetic biologist will tell you that every cell division has a trajectory that is what we call gender, and that's polarity, right? When you engender something in society, you are creating. A creation is a generative process. Gender is the same etymology. We're engendering, and polarity is the mechanism by which we engender and then manifest reality. So to degender is actually, it neutralizes the creation in the world. So I want to go in on polarity naturally occurs, and the male system, as it develops downward and outward, we have like the development of our organs, development of our psychology is all in this cascade of how our endocrine system is maturing and expressing, and it's different from the female system, just objectively and medically. And if we allow that to just happen, there are periods of the human development where insulin growth factor, IGF-1, secretes, and then these secondary sex characteristics take place, and there's micro traumas that happen that then we peer bond with others going through similar transformations.
So peer bond or pair bond?
Peer, like peer groups. This is how social development happens, and that process is important to becoming a full and complex human. And if left untouched, we'll find that most males, to a certain percentage, will group up around other males navigating puberty, both primary puberty at 8 to 11 years old, secondary puberty 18 to 22, it's neurological, and then ultimately when that process stabilizes around 27 to 30, you have this social stability of who you are in the world, and then historically we begin the death process around 35 to 40. Now we've extended that lifespan. So those stages of certain growth hormones secreting and then certain neurological chemicals anchoring in their reward payoff systems to optimize for reproduction, mate seeking, and then getting more food and getting more adventure and novelty. Those are all really interrelated. And if we just look at it in the most simple lens, this is what we call men and women.
Wow. Okay. Even I'm a little confused.
Yeah. So I just went into the biology of what's happening from our body growing and maturing, bonding with like animals going through similar developmental processes, and then us grouping that into a social category called a man and a woman.
Oh, okay. You mean from there, that's where it ends up.
Yeah. So if we interrupt that, as a lot of some like neo-feminist ideology or third wave feminism will advocate for, and the intent is to neutralize the negative impact of the patriarchy or whatever the motivation is. I think we then put this abstraction into these natural processes, and while there may be examples of societies in history who had different boundaries on what gender did and didn't do, and there was more freedom and flexibility or different patternings, there's still ultimately the male body is downward and outward energy, capable of outward energy, which can express as violence. The female energy, it brings in and incubates,
yes,
and then senses. And having injected estrogen for about 6 years, I essentially
What age was that when you began?
24.
Okay, 24.
So I essentially induced a neurological puberty around, and also this physiological puberty additional, where I got to have a little bit of that female. I felt like essentially what an 11-year-old female goes through, I went through.
You're experiencing that in your mid-20s.
Yeah, so like subcutaneous fat changed, like the texture of my vocal cords changed, and like the hair thickness and things changed. And then your body is how you reference. So I began sensing the world slightly differently, and therefore communicating slightly differently, until I resolved into how natal females communicate, which is much more communicating the emotional and the space and the sensations, and then having coherence. It's like they're outlining the topic, and then the topic emerges in the middle of the outline. Whereas,
so true,
right? Whereas men,
so
we have an idea, and then we scaffold the logic of that idea and push that idea forward, and then analyze it together.
I do want to make a point here. I think what this does is, like, the idea of the absolutes, I think, is dangerous in most instances, but the idea, I totally agree with you, where we're operating in like the more common, right? Like, of course, there's exceptions to every rule, but the rule does not disprove, or the exception does not disprove the rule.
Yeah.
So you're saying this, of course, the feminine using logic, the masculine using a lot of emotion. However, the base, like you're saying, the masculine really putting out,
Yeah,
and the feminine putting in, which you think of this idea, the masculine, like men, when they make love with a woman, they are then giving them a seed, and from a little seed that's microscopic, one of, what did they say, 100 million, creates life. I mean, a baby, it's a very, very powerful thing. Anything that is given to a woman, in my mind, it literally is received and it expands. You give a woman a house, she makes it a home. You give a woman food, she'll turn into a meal, not just ingredient. It's a very different construct, and I do believe that's the separating factor. And when you mentioned it was the dismantle the negative consequences of the patriarchy.
Yeah.
Not exactly. That's what you're saying. While doing that, that's the intent.
Yeah.
However, when they're doing that, it's also taking away the positive attributes of the patriarchy.
Right. And this is the same, right? Throughout time, the Council of Female Elders always kept the male war chiefs in check, right? It was always, yes, men, you can fight over your territorial disputes, but does it grow corn? Like, can we feed our children with this? Like, stay focused with all your intentions.
Would you say the masculine then does have more of the ego?
I think so. So the ego is a human construct to keep the evolutionary payoff systems running. So it's the ego is here to protect us. It's not a bad thing. It's here to protect our structure, to then reproduce our structure and refine our structure. But I think when the ego is too tightly holding on the steering wheel, we then can't expand into the ideological diversity and values diversity, which is also critical. So unpack that. If you have just Monsanto corn growing in your farm, you need to dump a bunch of pesticides on it so it doesn't get a virus and wipe out the whole species.
It wasn't Monsanto. They were the ones that were just, they were sued.
They sued all the time. Yeah. So it's monocropping, it's hegemony, and the same with ideology. If you only have one ideological frame, you need to artificially prop it up and put the pesticides on it and fertilize it with these chemicals so it stays, because it naturally wouldn't grow that much. In actual thriving life, you have diversity, right? A forest, you have diverse life forms, and those life forms all figure out interesting transactions and economics of nutrients and whatnot, and it has robustness. So then it's resilient to all these different threats and impacts that might come and can't be expected, and that's robustness in diversity is for thrival, for resilience. So the same with our ideology and our ego. I think there's an incentive to be in disagreement with another person such that we can refine our stance. And it's not a finite game. I'm right, you're wrong. And the one who's right then gets more attention. And then we all kind of focus onto that one ideology that becomes a zeitgeist, that becomes fascism, that becomes all the bad things. the ability to be in disagreement, and then my goal in communication is to help you refine your perspective, and then you would then be helping me refine my perspective, right? Like, I'm not going to take care of you.
Yeah.
I'm going to take care of me for you, and you're going to take care of you for me, as Jim Rohn says.
That's really powerful.
That's Tony Robbins' old
Jim
teacher.
Rohn's Tony Robbins' teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the idea of, are you going to any, not just relationship, but even in society. Like, yeah, and also, what's his name? JFK even said, we were speaking about his brother earlier, is the idea of, it's not asking what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And even that's the beauty of, for me, that's a truth. And that's a truth. It's a blanket truth, but then you can go in other areas saying, don't ask what you can do for your partner can do for you, ask what you can do for your partner. It's that model. It's like an algorithm, right?
Yeah.
Right. That can be placed into many different places. And to that exact point, how often is it that, especially now, when consumers, especially in the West or more developed cities, we're constantly looking to see how much attention we can receive, because that's the new currency, attention. Right. I mean, the phone is, if we look at the phone, it's the most expensive real estate on the planet. That's what I say. I came up with this a few days ago, and it is.
Yeah.
Right. People think, literally it could be the White House because it's very difficult to get in there, or to own it, right? Almost impossible, basically, or other places in the world. But it's really the phone. We've shifted from the idea of, I know this is a segue, just the idea of the attention being on the billboard outside when we're driving. We're going on the highway, we're driving down the roads, versus now the billboard is on our phone, right? Because we've become the avatar that's marketed to. No one sees the billboards. Sometimes they do, but people are finding food on their cell phone. They're finding entertainment on their cell phone. They're finding romance on their cell phone. And if we want to speak to that, it has to be done through the phone. So through that new model, how I see it, we've created the need for people to want to give, but really in the idea that they just want to keep receiving, because it's receiving the attention. They receive the attention. Maybe it fills the ego a little bit more. And through that, they now have sustenance in their life. All that in short to say is, are we going into things in modern society, especially in places like LA, where we're recording this, to actually give out with that intent of, we want to provide value, or we're only giving because it's conditional on the fact that we may receive?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's possible to give for the collective, for sure. It's interesting what you're bringing up with the phone being the most expensive real estate. I think that the human technology interface is a feedback loop that's guiding our evolution right now, and there's a lot to unpack in there.
Please.
So the technology can be as much as the techniques and protocols we use to make a baby, the techniques and protocols we use to grow food, the techniques and protocols we use to make a community. These are technology, and then language itself is technology. And language was limited because different words have different meanings, different locations. Whereas geometry is sacred and axiomatic no matter where it is. A triangle, a circle, and a square have this divine truth to them. Hence, all the ancient monolithic structures are really encoded textbooks of geometric truth. And now we have phones, right? I think it's pretty logical to conclude that we haven't had telecoms in this way in any past experience of human society. So there's something new here, uncharted territory, but it is disembodying us. And that, I think it kind of comes back to the gender conversation, because the phone is capable of more violence and more care than any one body is. And then any gendered body can use a phone or use a technology device to do any gendered action. So it's abstracting action into this grid that then expresses in the material form so far from the body that I think, again, it disembodies us. So if you end up building a business that is like ripping nutrients out of the ground and impoverishing communities, you may not even know, because all you're doing is drop shipping on Amazon, right?
You literally have no idea of the consequence of any of the actions.
Yeah.
And everything you're seeing is just the positive consequence.
Yeah.
No externality.
Yeah. So the Dunbar's number, we've got about 170 relationships we can track in our physiology, and that takes a long time to update that. maybe there's some linguistic technologies that could increase that number that I'm sure some politicians have mastered in DC.
That's the number for sure. That's the number of the Dunbar, so the number of relationships we can have that we can realistically and ideally manage. And then when you shift, people are on Facebook. Oh, I have 2,000 Facebook friends.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
Or that's what they're labeled as. But call any one of them for an emergency.
Yeah. Exactly.
Unless you're the most amazing fundraiser, GoFundMe thing, you're gonna have a lot of trouble doing that.
So our influence has scaled, but our actual body hasn't really tuned into the responsibility of that. So in the past, when we had more influence, we were mentored. There was maybe a court around the lord of some region or some ruler, and there was some mechanisms that really required that individual to rise to the responsibility of having so much influence, and then to habituate that. Like they would have posture coaches, speech coaches, and they would be very refined. And I would imagine that their experience of being a ruler with that much influence wasn't anywhere near what the experience of an Instagram influencer is today.
You look at, let's just say Queen Elizabeth, when she took the throne, I think she was, 30 or something? She was very young, let's just say. But even any other kings or queens in history, when they're risen and to power, they have, like you were saying, that court, speech coach, people who are mentoring them with the responsibility that they have, right? And that's when you see a lot of celebrities who, when they're in their late teens or 20s, they get so much wealth, influence, then they get people around them, and they swim. If they don't, then they sink. Now, into that example, you can have someone who's, let's say, in the tech space or Bitcoin. They do a pump and dump when they're maybe in their late teens, 20s, and not even in a negative way, but they went from being, let's say, really a dork in this space, but they went from being a broke dork to a very rich dork.
Yeah.
So what they did is they scaled in power and influence, but in my sense, they also scaled in their ability to also be reckless because there's no guidance around them.
Yeah. So this is value and price. And there's a difference. So markets can indicate value, but sometimes price is disconnected from that value. So yes, the crypto influencer who had essentially an NFT scam accessed price. They leveraged price and they accumulated material wealth, but the value they created in society isn't really commensurate with that.
Truly not.
So it's really an abstraction. So it's almost like if there was a natural flow, a river, they got a little fork out and had this big, deep puddle of wealth, but they're not really connected to the flow of value and currency through the community.
Would you say they're taking away from the value?
Well, it depends on what they do with it.
Yeah.
So if they're then using that to develop and cultivate themselves and then create value that's actually recognized beyond the financial side, maybe they could become amazing leaders. But if they're using that to just really freeze their development and double down on that dissonance or disruption that got them all that attention, that's not valuable. So there's a lot of people who speak on the potential of tokenized economics as utopian or prototypian, which means that they're going to iterate us towards a new form of economics, new form of relating that's better. And I think there's some truth there, but there's also I think we have to mature beyond disruption. It's not disrupting the work of our elders that we're actually so, we are indebted to in some ways. It is, how can we enhance that collective project? How can we enhance the intergenerational cultivation of value and be a part of legacy, right? How can we be both good ancestors to our descendants, right? And good descendants ourselves to our ancestors.
Wow.
Right. So how are we in that flow? What is our signature? And yes, more material resources help with that. So if we've leveraged and gotten a great price on the asset that we've created in the world, amazing, critical, I think, to the material integration of these spiritual concepts, but still not end game, right? It's still action and who we are. And, right. Jim Rohn again says, go make $1 million, not to have $1 million, to become the person who is worth $1 million.
Yes, and the skills you learn to pick up in the process,
and then give the money away.
Someone gives you 50 million. That's great. I mean, look, I'll take 50 million. Sure, I'm not going to say no to that. Although you get that, who did you become in the process? And also on this pod, it's of course we infuse a philosophical aspect as well as the growth aspect, right? We go with the name Zeus with Bruce.
Yeah.
I tell people a fancy story, but really it's really because it rhymes, Zeus and Bruce. But really the story of Zeus, right? He's in Greek mythology, right? His father Kronos sees him and his siblings as a threat, so he decides to eat them. Although Zeus's mother Rhea, what does she do with Zeus? Hides him, replaces Zeus with a rock. Kronos, maybe with his ego that's too far ahead, says, "Oh, let me just eat it." Yeah, that falls into this trap. Maybe it's too trusting. Who knows? Zeus gets sent to the bottom of, let's say, of the hierarchy, for lack of better terms, and he's now with the everyday common people, right? He's in this environment where now he doesn't have as much value as he knows he has. So we tie that in here because, for me, it's so much the story of you can't control your circumstance, but you can influence your destiny through your decisions. Of course, you need the resource, you need the know-how, you need the leaders, that infrastructure. Story of Zeus, what does he do? He lives with the common people, and he knows he has that inner potential. However, like the money that he can get, the resource, however, he can't get it until he becomes someone. Because when he becomes someone, he becomes God of Mount Olympus.
Yeah.
Not just the tyrant king who got there through the hand-me-out or however it happened. He became someone before he was someone.
Yeah. I love it.
It's a powerful shift, man.
Yeah. And that's the inner work. And, there's something about being a renunciate. So in that shift, I was just talking about this yesterday, there's, I'm valuable, right? You're valuable. Like I'm a gift, right? Supporters and believers surround me. Now, if I am in the Himalayas meditating, I am still valuable, right? That is 100% come from being. And yet I believe there is the application of self, which is part of my choice to have been born a human and to have the human experience through which life is experiencing itself. And that means that I am here to be fully applied, fully integrated. And it doesn't mean that I need to corner the market and become a billionaire. It might be an interesting experience if that unfurls. But what it does mean is that I am in relationship. I'm in the market. I'm in the market of ideas. I'm in the market of execution. I'm in the market of strategy. And that's why I in Emergent Intelligence, we talk to a lot of these founders and get that mindset clarity on, why not me? Why not me? The one who builds the next fuel source, the one who builds the next propulsion system. Why not me? And that's exactly right. Like we have done the inner work and we're doing it and we're continuing that to lifelong infinite game. And then how is it expressing in who you are in the world? How are others enrolled in that? And then how are you then leading teams of people to execute on these large projects? And it's literally when Zeus shifted, as you said, into who we know him as, and he was still unestablished in the institution of the Greek pantheon, then he very quickly rose to his status because he was being in integrity at every decision point, right?
No way. Yeah. So there's different routes that are taken. That's a very powerful. I never even thought of that because, essentially, there's a great book by Stephen Covey, not the one who wrote 7 Habits. I think it was his son, but it basically says the speed of trust is what it talks about. And trust typically builds, when you see someone do something that, because what is integrity? In my mind, it's doing what you say you will do. And of course, all integrity is equal because it's integrity, but the integrity that someone has when they do something that's unpopular, that's difficult. They keep their word. As you're saying, Zeus, if we study more of the history, he was doing this more at every level, and that leads to him climbing the ranks. It snowballs and it builds. And I think that was why he was probably the god of Mount Olympus and not his father Kronos.
Yeah,
right?
I can't not point to this. So Kronos and Kairos, right? So Kronos, chronological time. Kairos is emanating time. It's a deep present moment.
Could you actually, because myself, I'm not familiar with that concept.
Yeah. So Kairos is deep time. The Jesuits have their Kairos retreats, but this is a Pythagorean concept. It just means emanating time. It's nonlinear time. It's this state of presence, and we have different waypoints in our Kairos. It's like a kairotic experience where you maybe meet somebody and time dissolves. You're in flow with them. You're in ecstasis with them, and you have this energetic resonance. And then next time you're floating around in chronological time. Maybe years have passed. You see them again. You drop right back in. It's like, oh, I'm there. we're at the same time space point of Kairos. And so the Hermetics will talk about the intersection of Kairos and Chronos is the crucifixion. So we talk about the Christ consciousness, and there's a lot of esotericism on this. But when we talk about our chronological time intersecting with these deep moments of present awareness, that is that point at which the Christ consciousness emerges.
Ooh.
We can go deep on that.
Definitely, because I know we wanted to talk about more so not necessarily just the death of God, but the also rise of, as we said, the guru, rise of the social avatar becoming a deity where people worship. I believe that's actually a really great segue.
Yeah.
So just so I can reiterate that you were talking about chronological time and the kairotic time. So you said it, and then when you meet in the middle, that's related to the crucifixion.
Yeah.
Explain more on that, and then we'll transition to the segue.
So I alluded earlier that language has place-based meaning, so it's not really that good a technology to be universal, but geometry is universal. So this concept of the cross you see in many different esoteric frameworks, and just to give that, so there's exoteric, which is an institutional religion, so Christianity, the esoteric side of that, which is only available through direct experience, and there are protocols to have direct experiences. Breath, fasting, plants, right, medicines, ceremonies. The esoteric side is Gnosticism. Islam, exoteric. The esoteric side is Sufism. Judaism, exoteric, institutional Judaism. The esoteric side is the Kabbalah. So all of these esoteric technologies are typically gated by initiatory experiences called ordination. You're ordained a priest. You're ordained into these brotherhoods and sisterhoods.
Is this mainly just with monotheism, or
this is all
the three models?
So if you're in an asana, if you're in a yogic school,
like in a mandir,
so if you're a tantrika, you'll be the dakas and dakinis would then have initiatory experiences and basically train these protocols to reach ecstasis, and then fine tune these protocols. So in gnosis is that experience of no time, direct experience with God, source, divinity, or the awesomeness of everything all at once, which is so great and bright that we then create chronological time to artificially spread that awareness into an artificial past, artificial future, and create linearity.
What is the power of linearity in that?
It throttles down the sensation of that truth, because the human animal can't operate here and now in 3D with that 5D awareness. So we spread it out into the illusion of past, present, future, when really it's all right now.
It's the kairotic time, as you're saying, more as opposed to the chronological.
Exactly. Yeah. So we spread it out into an artificial past and future, so then we can create distance and space from those experiences. Because right now you are a child and you are your elder, and we're talking as young adults.
Well, that's the same thing. I mean, the same Kodah, when Kodah was 5, is still here.
It's very much here,
right? That reminds me of one of my favorite thought experiments. A little bit related. It's I forget the name of it, but it's someone's ship, and the idea is you have a ship at the port, and let's say it's a wooden ship, and you probably heard
Jason the Argonauts. This is the ship. Yeah, but you're replacing the wood.
Yeah, it's like every time it goes out, there's a piece that's replaced. Is it still the same ship? Because literally every 7 years, like your skin changes, all these things, but you're constantly being molded and shaped. One new experience, one traumatic experience, one uplifting experience. Are you still Kodah at that point? Is that the frame of thinking chronologically? Is it kairotic? I believe you said it was.
Yeah, well, I would say that all of the potential wood that ever existed and will exist is part of that ship. Whether we're experiencing it in the configuration of that ship or not is less relevant. So in true deep present moment awareness, Thich Nhat Hanh will talk about in the opening page of Being Peace. He essentially describes that I am the words on this page, the tree that was turned into the paper of this page, and the air that I was breathing in and out. And he says, I am all of that. And the first page of Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh literally brings you into that awareness of like this book and myself are one.
I want to add to that. It's correct me if you see something different here, but I think he's speaking there in metaphor. I also think it's very literal, though.
I think it's literal.
I think it's quite literal. I mean, if we even think about it logically, let's say when either one of us passed away, let's just say we're buried, or even if we're ashes, we're going to go to there's going to be dirt or some soil.
Yeah.
From there, at some point, there will probably be some plants that'll be created. or whatever it
Yeah.
becomes,
Yeah.
and then that becomes plants. So then it will become, let's say, a tomato.
Yeah.
At a certain point in time, it will.
Yeah.
Right. And then also, where are we creating the tools for the computer we're recording with, the microphone?
Yeah.
I used the example of the Tesla before. I'm still working to afford a Tesla,
Yeah.
but I was saying,
coming.
like, guys, we are the Tesla. They go, what do you mean? So of course we are. The Tesla was built from what? Materials on Earth.
Earth. It's 100% natural.
It's so literally we are. I think people see that and they think it's very hippy dippy, very LA, metaphysical, all this stuff. If we actually ground it in reality, I think Thich Nhat Hanh was actually quite correct. I think he's embodying in more of interconnectedness and the energy aspect. So on that frame, however, on a literal frame, we literally are everything that exists.
Yeah. So yes, we are everything that exists, literally. And it is very LA and metaphysical. And there is a bit of a deficit in people's literacy around metaphysics. And that's, I think, the meaning crisis that's pushing people to places like LA and Austin where these conversations are happening. Because historically, we trusted our spiritual authority, we trusted our institutional religion, just like your financial health is correlated to being banked, right? Being in the macroeconomic flow, being able to access debt instruments and finance projects and having reputation or credit score. The same in a spiritual institution of a church where you're showing up every week, you're in spiritual community and you're in discernment, and the priest is preaching or the rabbi is preaching, but they're not the ultimate authority. They're guiding and shaping the individual parishioners or congregations' introspective work. And then they have one-on-one moments of reconciliation and or study together where you then do that quest on your own, because ultimately I sleep as me every night and no one else. That priest isn't going to be in, it's me and source every day for all eternity.
You and source, or
as
and?
me as source,
Oh,
me
as
me
source,
and
okay.
source. It really is. There's isolation at a certain level of awareness and as witness and then as source. So I believe that the institutional religions have, because they're human structures, have failed or fallen short of the rate of innovation in society and technology, and then the communication of our telecoms and media, that we're now all becoming pretty well versed, but not really formally structured in the epistemology. So we all have a proximity to these concepts, but we haven't really been trained to deal with them.
Could it be, so this is why I love so much about biblical texts and even Torah, Quran, whatever you want to read, and like the Analects, Bhagavad Gita, just the idea that we all fall short of the glory of God, right? And I think that's even a deeper discussion. What is God? How do we define that? Is God like our highest self? Is our highest energy? Is it knowledge, right? I believe it's Socrates. I love one of my favorite philosophers. But he talks about that true evil becomes like ignorance, because you wouldn't be acting in a way that's out of alignment. You may think you want to secure your family's needs. It's like, oh, I want it, so that's why I had to rob that family. No. There's another way. We just haven't found it yet. So is God the highest place that we want to reach with intelligence, with how we know how to operate within the system?
Right.
And maybe there's a disconnect, and like technology, maybe technology does become our next God, right?
Yeah.
A powerful story just before we get in there is, I was hearing, I want to give him credit, it was Pitbull. And this guy's actually surprisingly deep. And, I saw him perform once and I'm like, wow, this guy's good. He was talking about something of, if we look at the story of, I'm going to connect it here. The story of Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Eve, they're in the Garden of Eden. Eve eats the apple, right? That was the one thing God said not to do, right? It was the bite of the apple, and then God comes in, I believe even before she finished the apple, I believe. If we look at our phone, our phones, when we turn around, what do we see? A bitten apple. And when we use our phones, we're using it like we're praying to it. We have one hand on one hand. Ritual aspect.
Swipe. Finish. Double tap. Yeah.
Swipe up, swipe down. Hopefully you get swiped right on. Hopefully, right? You're getting swiped left, it's not too much fun. And with the phone, does that now become our God?
For sure. And this is brands and religions have similar frames. But just going into the God of Genesis, so the God of the Torah is a little different theology than the God of the New Testament, and a lot of scholars will look at this, right? And Genesis is really different than the rest of the Torah, but these are frames for folks to shape consciousness and then ultimately manifest their lives, communities, and purpose here on Earth. So there's a lot of power in the words. Or we generate a whole realm of possibility in our language. So looking at this good bad as a construct that was later, much newer than the scripture of Genesis, and so good badness is not, I think, the intent with the apple in the Garden of Eden. The concept of knowledge is illumination. So Lucifer is light. Imagine Lucifer is more light being applied to say you're in the jungle and you have a broader light. Now you're aware of all of these things. Now your consciousness is spread out and all this awareness. So it takes discipline to focus and act and proceed. Whereas if you just had the one amount of light and followed the framework, you probably would have moved forward more, but you maybe would not have been as conscious. So maybe less agency and freedom, but then more action. So there's a balance between light and action. So it's not wrong to have more knowledge. It's not bad, but it is, we are accountable to that increased influence and awareness that comes from having more light. So if we look at what evil is, it's the absence of light. So if we have intention to do good, we all start, say, like housing the homeless, and then moving people who are at risk for housing instability into more housing assistance programs and whatnot, all of those good intentions start institutionalizing and scaling up. And then there might have been some oversights. We might have not been able to house trans people. We might have not been able to house people that have a movement impaired or different levels of physical ability. And then suddenly there's someone could look who's personally affected by that and say, oh, you have oppressed me intentionally. So they have personified the shadow. Whereas really, the sofa kind of eats you a little bit.
Yeah,
we're finding our space in it. They may point to that shadow in between all these good intentions and say there's a collusion of negative actors there that are aimed at me. When in reality, that's just the space between all the good actors.
So is there agency then? Because then at what point, that's the whole idea of, are you responsible for the outcome, right? Because some things you can't control. Versus, is there any autonomy?
The ego, I think we definitely own the impact of our actions, whether or not they were the intention of our actions. So if I'm truly committed to being of service and then I hurt someone in the incidentals or in the unconscious bias of my intention being enacted in the world, I'm super down to help make that right, because that, my intention is to be of service. And here's now a new person to serve. Right. Now it's when someone holds firmly to their view that this is the right way, and then the other people are saying, hey, I'm hurting, and then they say, oh, too bad, so sad. Maybe there's some moral judgment on that, but there's also considerations on where is that person who is identifying as experiencing harm. Are they actually experiencing harm, or is their projection of identity being attacked and they're attaching their self to that identity? So if someone's saying, I'm an oppressed person, and then we're making a world which enables more agency and freedom and more movement and more self authority and sovereignty, and then they're feeling, oh no, I'm now I can't, the oppression doesn't really connect to that, and they're still holding on to that oppression, even though that oppression is ceasing to exist. Then they take it personally.
Who am I if not oppressed?
Yeah.
Who am I if not the oppressor?
Yeah, there's a lot there. There. And this is like, we are all agents and we are all consciously creating, but we may not be ready to own that. And that's a point where we are in development. So in transformational psychology, you talk about the developmental framework that someone may be in, and you speak to them there, and you help them move more into coherence. You don't say, come all the way into full agent creator. You say, hey, how is that for you? And you help them maybe look at the next step when they're ready.
It sounds like that's part of the coaching. And I know we're both in the space, and it's figuring out how often, you can't force someone to change. You can nudge somebody, but it's also part of that process of, because they're in their identity, right? Do we use reverse psychology? Is that manipulative? Do we nudge them in a certain way? Is that manipulative?
Yeah, well, getting curious is not manipulative. Preserving someone's agency, right? You don't always want to go in and smash someone's frame and leave them a pile of rubble on the ground, right? You can build rapport, and in that rapport bring embodiment, and then they can have their own direct experiences of ecstasis. They can find their own gnosis and find their own language to then manifest their own lives.
That's a lot when people go into therapists, psychiatrists, obviously incredible professions. Just the idea you go in somewhere saying, oh, Kodah, cool, Kodah, you're depressed, you're anxious, you're schizophrenic, you're this, and that. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's give you some pills, or this will be a framework. 3 months, don't worry, I'll be with you. Okay. I mean, that you're shifting their identity so much. And even if they felt unstable, so maybe that gives them a sense of significance. Like, oh, I am this.
Yeah.
I can now be that.
Control.
It's control. And then you really ditch out of their identity, replace it with a new one. The balance, and I'm curious how you'd see this. What is the balance of influence into someone's identity? Because, like you said earlier in the episode, that you can talk on a mic and get people to do certain things.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, that's the thing people say, oh, am I responsible for what that person did? You're not. So if that person does something good and you help them, you have influence. How responsible are you? Are you 80% responsible? Once you become 51%, are you more responsible than them?
Yeah.
How do you navigate the influence that a person can have on another? And at what point do you decide, okay, this is too much? And just navigating that entire realm.
You're in the realm of licensure. So psychotherapy professionals have like licensing bodies, and they're accredited, so because they have very powerful tools. So they're checks and balances. Coaches are essentially the wild west in a lot of sense, but some of them are licensed or certified,
accredited, like a BC or something.
So I'm trained in Qigong, I'm trained in Zeg Forum, a whole host of things. And now Flow Genome Project, we talk a lot about our frames that we work with, and I've gone through those initiations, and then working with the indigenous, I have those frames. So, and then I have my lived experience. And as one human sharing lived experience to another, we can share. Now, I think that the responsibility is to cause no harm. And when someone is still attached to a mask or a worldview, and then we're destroying that worldview, they're going to experience that as attacking them.
You take something out, what's the replacing? And they're personalizing the experience.
So maybe not taking it out, but creating clarity and distinctions that they can accept or not accept, that frame isn't them. And once someone's realized that, oh, I'm not the bundle of symptoms that are expressing as a pathology, I'm actually a full human. And this pathology is one diagnostic tool, maybe a search query on Google to find some tools to mitigate this symptom expression. And maybe this deeper transformational work that I can engage to then create a life that habituates, then ultimately my body will grow. Biology is upstream of psychology. And my body will grow to no longer fuel these patterns. And then I will, quote unquote, heal from this state. Maybe that person will embark on such a journey when they no longer identify with the symptoms and the pathology that had been labeled. A diagnosis is not a destination. And we don't need to remain as not a victim, as not a fill in the pathology. But because when symptoms are very well managed, we may no longer satisfy the diagnostic criteria of that pathology. And that's, I think, the real transformational potential of some of the deeper technologies that are more in the coaching space. But then you have folks that are psychotherapists and internal family systems and process therapy and licensed clinical social workers with psychedelic therapeutic licensing, right? We have these multi-stack professionals now who can help. I fall somewhere in the entrepreneurial mindset that comes from this coaching background that has experience in therapy and trauma as lived experience. So I rest more in the economic expression of someone's dharma and being in integrity and action with that and enrolling others in the world, and then higher level strategy to support and grow that. But others rest in being a professional focused on trauma or focused on XYZ pathology and a set of tools to help treat that. So depending on where your guide is really resting and standing is how then we as a potential client can orient, is that the right guide for me at this stage in my journey? Right? I may not be the right person to work with somebody at the beginning of their journey, but maybe someone who has tried entrepreneurship and failed a few times, or has tried a lot of entrepreneurship, had a lot of success and is ready for the next thing, but is actually still seeking this external permission and worthiness. Then I can go in and yes, there's the professional skill around the business strategy, but then there's also the internal psychology. And we can start working on the psychology in service of that later downstream economic expression. So just understanding the map and understanding where one may be honestly in that. And new insights may lead to the realization that, I may be in a different place on this map than I thought I was. I thought I was way out there ready to go in the game, and really I've got some trauma that I got to work on.
Right.
Call it someone who specializes.
And the trauma gets realized, or any kind of experience, it's like saying, oh, especially I think in relationships, we could dabble a little bit on that, is you can do a lot of work on certain things, and then you get to a certain place within a new relationship or an existing one, and then you believe you did the training here in this new space, but something deep-rooted comes up, right? It's like, wait, I worked on being trusting with someone, but why am I not trusting this person, right? And then once you dig really deep back down, I don't believe in so much in going deep into traumas. I think a lot of the effect of reliving and replaying your trauma can actually have negative aspects. Sure. However, finding I like to call it the weed, and then pulling it out from the root, that's the only way you really extrapolate what needs to be extrapolated at that moment.
Yeah.
Right? Like really getting to the nitty and gritty of it to explain behavior. I think we don't go to the past to obsess with it and not to repeat it so that we can learn it, right? Great author, Yuval Harari. We were talking about him earlier. Love his books. He has such a great, I think he's one of my favorite thinkers. Homo Deus, Sapiens, 21 Lessons. And one thing he talks about specifically, many things, my God. But one of his main things is that about history. And that history is not the study of the past, rather history is the study of change. I think that's so profound. It's our personal history, our history as a collective, our history. How did we get from A to B? How did Kodah, when he was 20, get to where he is now? What happened in that process? Yeah, you can learn the past. What's the value of that? How did he change and go through this metamorphosis, going through all your experiences with also transgender, with politics, now getting to the place where you are right now?
And it's useful to compare maps, right? So I made it here. So I have to fill it in an interesting trajectory or route that may be valuable for others, right? So I love that frame of history as the study of change, because that project is ongoing, and we are shaping the future as we live it. So we can go into Yuval Navari. He talks about the technology and really transhumanism
and Homo Deus mainly.
And these tools. So the fund of funds, we did a lot of diligence on AI and biotechnology, Earth Capital Advisors. I was with last year for the preceding 18 months. So doing actual diligence in the space, we were way ahead of this media bubble in generative AI. So generative AI is a subset of reinforcement learning or unsupervised learning, which is a type of neural network that doesn't need a controlled training environment to produce novel insights, and it can recompile and create composable outputs that then can be interacted with to create further composable outputs. So it's really doing what humans do with thinking. And now we're seeing some companies realize the upper limits of large language models, which are now upon us. And then we're putting in ontologies or structures of logic. So then we're putting in frameworks into these models to not only have this recall ability, but now also have perspective. And that's going to make the models in the next quarter or two come out with much, not just how does Jordan Peterson think or how would Socrates have thought, but also like how would they then create new insights on new topics in consistency with how they created their current corpus of insights.
Right. So is there new insight? Is it based off of is it the study of the pattern of how they arrived at past insights?
And then using that to create new insights in that would really, so I'm curious to see in the near future, if I feed my entire corpus of writing and work into an AI that then talks like me, which is already happening. I'm having it write stuff for me and it sounds like me as a lexicon it's using, the phraseology it's using. But I'm curious, will then they derive conclusions that are similar to what I am actually deriving?
A few deep points I want to touch on, because I know we're nearing nearer to the end.
Yeah.
I truly love where we're at. We're really hitting it.
Yeah.
So then I think that one thing that comes up for me as you're saying that is, at what point is there a genesis of an idea in our mind, right? So for you're saying when you're speaking with AI can write like you using a lexicon, like your lexicon, is everything predictable then? So is there any? I guess I'm getting to the point of determinism versus free will.
Great book and now series on this. So Isaac Asimov writes the Foundation series. Now it's on Apple TV series. It released their second season over the summer. I'm currently watching that, and they call it psychohistory. Psychohistory is the study of past events to inform future outcomes, and it's very sophisticated mathematics that they're using, which are not dissimilar to what we're actually experiencing in technology today. And the plot essentially says this mathematician has predicted a coming dark age in this galactic empire of societies, and to then shorten the dark age, he's building a foundation that will contain all of human knowledge and allow us to reboot faster.
And faster in the sense of
he goes and think of like building pyramids that contain textbooks so we can reboot. The collapse of empire will happen, and then we'll be able to start and avoid some of the lessons learned. We won't go into the same expression. It's a very interesting thought because he's dealing with AI, robotics, cloning, governance. It's very aristocracy class.
Well, it's also the idea of what is the Library of Alexandria, right? When it's burned down, I mean, how much knowledge and wisdom and insight is burned down there? How do we preserve it, right? And that's again the study of history is how is history even written, right? It's they say it's his story to make it gendered, typically, but then also is it the victor who writes it, right? At what point are we actually accepting history as it is? You said Isaac Asimov.
Isaac Asimov.
He's a philosopher, no?
Yeah.
A little. Author, I guess we're all philosophers, for sure. Right? That's one thing I want to encourage on here as well is really. I do want to break this down quick because I have a couple other questions I want to get to. Even philosophy, right? Yeah. So often we use words. One, the overuse of certain words, we actually dilute it of its value, right? So if we call everything a tragedy, okay, if I drop my coffee or our teas, tragedy, I'm diluting its actual value by honestly, in my mind, abusing it, because so often we're so dependent on dramatic effect of language because we can't actually properly articulate it. We take certain words and put it on certain places, right? I think that's one of the challenges we tend to face. I just lost my train of thought on that one.
One of the challenges we tend to face in diluting our words. Are there certain words that we're diluting that you feel like would be better not to dilute as we all step into this identity of philosopher?
Oh, yes, exactly. Culture? So the philosophy aspect, just like the train, you said the river, there's a fork, it goes in different places. Explaining, I think people do look at philosophy and even personal development and growth. If you even look at the etymology of philosophy, right? So philo means someone that is in love with, right? To not use a great, I'll say cinephile because we're in LA, be respectful of the culture, cinephile, right? Their love of film.
Yeah.
If then we go to philosophy, what does that translate to? Philo is love of. Sophia, that's my niece's name actually.
Oh, amazing.
I kind of gave it to her, but my sister doesn't agree. Yeah. It's okay. I didn't
you inspired it.
I definitely did. And she's not my favorite, but no, she is. So of wisdom, right? So philosophy is the love of wisdom. A philosopher is a lover of wisdom. Yeah. Right. So I want to bring that in because we talk about Isaac, and I think that's something that for me is very personal because learning philosophy is not to be so like someone who's erudite and is knowledgeable about a very specific field. It's the ability to contextualize an experience. One of the best experiences I believe of that are people who are going through suffering, but immense suffering, not suffering that I feel lonely. The suffering of, let's say, a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah, someone in Israel right now.
Someone experiencing these tragedies. Yeah. And the idea of Viktor Frankl, right? His exact idea, I believe Nietzsche said it first, but a person with a strong enough why can bear anyhow. Yeah. And it's that idea, that's his philosophy. Yeah. So I don't share this, especially on the podcast and how we're going about it, to just be the ivory tower scholar, although that's nice in some capacity. Yeah. How do we make it practical? How are we pragmatic with our philosophy?
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that got me through before I deconstructed the frameworks of feminism and remembered that, most every road was built by men. 99.9%.
I had this discussion. I want to go there too.
Yeah, 4% of wealth is held by 4% of men hold the wealth. 96% of men are actually middle class. The kind of pointing at the patriarchy is bad is a little bit inaccurate, and started to reconstruct a divine or conscious masculinity. I looked at what's my why, and I'm very interested in this mimetic evolution, this trajectory of our species, i.e., our legacy. And at the time, I was in a hurry. So let's augment our embodiment. And there's a vein of work called morphic freedom, which is what bodybuilders are doing, which is what cosmetic surgery people are doing, which is what the transgender and transsexual community is doing. They're exercising morphic autonomy, which is great. No shame, like go for it. Have a third arm, get some wings, like do whatever you want when you're 18 and the developmental process is pretty stabilized. Interrupting that as a youth is, I think, an ethical consideration I have a lot of thoughts about. But I was in this frame of peaceful evolution of our species. And that allowed me to do things like have genital surgery and take hormones, because I understood that my consciousness would go through an experience and the culture would go through an experience. I ultimately thought there'd be a rapture where everybody realized that this is the future and we're going to be a multiplanetary species.
When you say rapture, are you meaning a specific event?
Yeah,
when people hear rapture, they think of biblical aspect.
Yeah, it's with the etymology. Rapture just means a massive event where history is proven. One camp is proven right, the other camps are proven wrong.
Wow.
So a lot of religions have an inbuilt rapture ideology, and then a lot of us unconsciously hold that, people say synthetic versus natural. The naturals, all the synthetic people will get a disease and die, and the organic natural hippies will be like, told you so. And that's clearly a bias and clearly not true, because all the chemicals that we're using in any kind of industrial process are also of earth and also natural.
Exactly.
And we can blur that. Like the Tesla is natural, the cell phone is natural. Like your words aren't.
If it exists in nature, by definition, it is natural.
Yeah. So there's a thing called techno-naturalism, which integrates Elon Musk and the permaculture farmer on the same team of biodiversity throughout the cosmos, which is interesting. Techno-naturalism is a cool integrated framework for futurism. But I now have shifted from this transhumanism to a stewardship with ideological diversity. So how can we cultivate a robust garden of life? And that's my why. So that doesn't incentivize me to go as fast as I can to change my body. That actually incentivizes me to go as presently as possible into community and vulnerability, relationship and connection, and then be of service of that whole garden and ecosystem, i.e. I'm working with the deep technology for fuel systems, transportation, energy systems, and I'm working with the Gena Health and Flow Genome Project on cultural architecture and plants as food and medicine. So this is supporting community flourishing, ethical tribalism, as it were. And I'm very interested now if that why is strong enough to carry me through the coming cultural conversations around technology. And I believe that we can design things that our children will use, and they're not going to be hunchback screen people. They're going to be heart-centered, deep breathing.
If there's
connected.
If there's a connection, then you're saying that with the techno-naturalism, the ability, because you've seen the studies where, studies are forecasts, right? You can forecast the weather, tomorrow can change. Obviously, there's some more predictability with certain studies, but the idea that, if we're hunchback
screen people,
and how it's everything that it does to our psyche, our biology. A lot of the technology we even have now, it's not as exponential in my mind as the technology we had before, right? Even
a wheel,
right? A wheel compared to this, where like you were talking about your grandpa for the Apollo mission, and the phone has more computing power than the computers that took this. There's a point on this I want to go on as well. It's related to, again, back to Yuval and with AI and all this stuff. He talks about the ability of humans to be hacked. Right? It's a very powerful concept. I want to illustrate it and get your take on it. It's, what does it mean to hack somebody? Right? If you're nudging someone, or let's say when people use certain forms of manipulation in conversation, there's a manipulation there. You're hacking them in a way. You're taking over, in a sense, their psychology and leading them to act a certain way. Just like when someone hacks into a computer system, something like that. The way he formulates it is like AHH, ability to hack humans, equals B times C times D. The formula he uses here, I'd love to hear your take, is the B is biological understanding. How much we understand human psychology now, neuroscience, the studies we can do with MRIs and all the EEGs and all these other systems that we have. That's the B. Next is C, meaning computing power. Like we talked about the cell phone, more computing power. Pattern recognition. That's Tony Robbins talks a lot about that aspect. So you have biological understanding, we have the computing power, and then what's the missing ingredient is D, data. So I can know about your body and what's going on there. I could have a computing power that can compute all the details and all the math I need to do. But I don't know the data, meaning the information about you. How much of that did you give up willingly to me?
Mm-hmm.
So what he talks about is why it's so easy to be hacked is because you have the biological understanding. You can compute all the data you need, and then you actually have the data that, if you think about even in Nazi Germany or with Stalin or Mao, that for them, they'd have to watch everybody. Maybe someone stops clapping, they're disloyal. But what if you're wearing an Apple Watch and you're clapping, they read your biometrics, and they know that when your eyes were looking at Mao or the leader, they saw it. So all that to ask, and to share, are we at a nexus at a certain point where is that going to take away the free will we have, our ability to make decisions, and even be that individual with our identity, or are we always getting hacked? And the question is just to what degree.
I love this. And this is the RAND Corporation of Technology Ethicists. They talk a lot about this.
RAND Corp?
Yeah, RAND. Yeah, they're here in LA.
Yeah, my buddy works there.
Yeah. So Ray Dalio speaks about algorithmically assisted decision making. And this was in 2019. I met him at Summit Series LA for a smaller invite-only little gathering. And maybe about 10 of us in the room. And then we had dinner after. And he was talking about how his hedge fund, Blackwater, they do algorithmically assisted decision making, i.e., when they're in Zoom together and they're talking about things, there's an AI monitoring the biometrics of all the participants, and then when they have decisions, they have participation, and then the AI gives an insight to who was out of residence biometrically, and then they invite that person to share their experience of the discernment process, and then they find that there's actually a very different experience of the process, and then they're able to retune. So there's novel insights in the meeting coherence that are drawn by this algorithmic assistance, and that's one example of, I think it could be used for group coherence in a positive way. When I was at the wearable device design company called Soyana, we talked a lot about can you make a VR experience where someone's HRV influences the play of the game. And we actually had this concept of AR mesh networks, which is augmented reality, then meshes. So you have 5 or 6 people in a shared augmented reality experience. So right now it's 2 people, and our biometrics would create a extended reality of the weather in the room, and we would, if we were getting angry, it would maybe start raining, or if we were happy, it'd be sunshine and rainbows, right? And then you could see this being a really immersive, experiential event could happen where people are wearing AR goggles, and then suddenly there's a DJ that's mixing all of this information into a cool experience. So there's some cool stuff where that could be used benevolently, but then there's the historic case where this 16-year-old woman was getting ads for pregnancy tests, and her father saw these on her computer and was like, wait, what? And then the email was linked to his account, and he got an email for a pregnancy ad, and she didn't even know she was pregnant. And then that sparked a conversation.
Look at how much that can destroy so much of a social relationship, and that aspect of it. Is that the same thing? I think it was when even Kobe Bryant passed away, or sometimes this happens with celebrities, is they're notified of the partner's passing
by the news.
Yes.
Your question was, is this data freely given, right?
Yeah.
So microfacial tension, there's skin pigment, like how much blood flows in the skin, there's eye movements, there's how long content lingers in a feed before you scroll down or up. And we don't even need these many data points to triangulate and position the next outcome, the next behavior of the user. When I was working at the COVID Alliance, RAND Corporation was involved because Google and Apple gave us backdoors to the location data of every cell phone. So then the Amazon team from the Alexa team, they were involved. And it's like they told us essentially that with the location, phone model, and last app, over time, those 3 data points can give us the next 0-point prediction of the user. So
how much? 0?
So 0 point means that if the user turns on the device, the team would be able to predict not only what app they would open, but what first input they would put. And that was just from location data, phone model, and app usage.
The absolute very basics. And that's the whole argument he makes is it's not about knowing you perfectly. It's about knowing you better than you ideally know yourself.
Yeah, so exactly. So the ethics came in when we then had real-time location data of every phone, and it was under the government enablement for essentially peacekeepers. They would send out social workers to break up crowds in Central Park, Manhattan during the pandemic. They didn't know how spreadable the virus was, and then eventually they shut that down because it was too predictive, and it could become like a Big Brother thing. So it went into a research container that doesn't have full access to that data pool anymore. But this is very much here and able to roll out. So the ability to know more about us than we know about us. Like, I know that if I'm scrolling through Instagram and then suddenly I get an ad for like posture, like, wait,
You're
am
gonna
I
get it after this
slouching?
conversation. Yeah.
Am I slouching? Was it like ambient audio data from previous conversations that are selling that ambient audio data to other firms, and then they're processing it and not generating insights and then delivering that, associating that with my accounts that are using Google sign-ins? That's a very real thing. And Uber owns 5 minutes before and after app usage of ambient audio data, and then they sell that to Google, and Google uses that to.
So wait, they are able to hear.
Yeah, so the ambient audio data is unstructured audio data from around, and that's part of the user agreement you sign when you're using these apps.
The ones that everybody reads.
The ones that everybody reads,
yeah.
So that ambient audio data has a lot of richness to it, and we're now developing AI to mine that better with vocal tone, which could lead to emotional sentiment, and then other words and phrases, and then lexicon. So you can associate that with the user profile and then bundle that. And the making sense of that data is a lot of work, a lot of money, but the fruits are we could not only put purchasing decisions in front of customers more precisely, but we could also start cultivating customers who didn't even know or didn't even really want that thing, but then could begin to be nurtured into then wanting and then transacting. And that's where the ethics become ambiguous. Are we helping? If I truly believe that my product or service is helping the world and making people's life better, I want to preserve their agency to freely choose it. I don't want to manipulate their momentum towards making a decision, but I don't want to hide or blur that. I don't want to artificially say, hey, if you're ready, you can possibly choose. I want to say it seems like the next step for you is to talk about working together.
Right, man. Oh my, we go so many different directions with that.
Right. So it seemed like my sense is the next step would be to have a focused conversation on the plan you want for your life, and then talk about what it would take to engage me to invest time in that, supporting you in that. And then they say, it sounds great, and we have a conversation. And I try to keep the math as objective as possible, like really simple. I'm just, okay, $250 a session, 3 for 600. It's really standard. If you want to build something that has a specific outcome, we'll look at the economic value of that outcome and how I want to participate in that, or how I want to invest my time to be a part of that based on this 250 base frame. Now, other folks are completely subjective, and it's like 333 or 5555, and then it's all trust and energy. And I advocate for more objectivity. When I look at marketing agencies that have performance marketing rollouts, they have like performance and success fees based on the outcomes that they deliver, and then the setup installation fees. And it's just really objective as possible when pricing your offer, as objective as possible when enrolling your clients, and preserving their ability to honorably say no. Like to honorably say no, not over pressuring, but not having no attractiveness. Like, be very attractive, but don't force people in. Be very attractive and then honor their no.
Right. I mean, there's so many ethics and philosophical frameworks to that, because it asks the question, how far do we push or nudge in order for a certain direction, right? I think it's the whole thing. The example I like to give is like a parent and their child. The parent nudges their child to go brush their teeth, right? So many different models you can use. You could use fear intimidation. You could use, hey, the tooth fairy. So what you're telling, it's like this. Hey, if you brush your teeth, whatever, take care of yourself. When your tooth falls out, put it under the pillow, and you'll get money from the tooth fairy. So what you're also, think about what you're demonstrating, what values you're instilling into your child. One, there's a fictional ghost that's going to come. Your tooth, you can sell parts of your body for currency to then buy you things. Mystery money will show up. Then again, it's also showing, hey, if you're intentional with your actions, you deposit and you're safe and secure, you can then derive a financial outcome. There's some common good. Even a simple decision like that, what's the philosophical framework? So is there focus on philosophy? Is there focus on ethics? Focus on morals? When people can tell me, Bruce, you need to get this coffee mug. Why? And then I can be convinced, did I do something against my own will? Maybe. Was it better for me? Maybe. And at what point do I decide? Do they decide?
Mm-hmm.
Is it when
Yeah.
we're 17 years old, 364 days, 23 hours, and 58 minutes? Do we have zero autonomy and individual making? But the moment we turn 18 years old and 1 second, are we now an independent maker? Or to circle back, do we need to have a ritual that gets us to that point? When I went to Brazil, my cousin was 13, I was 16. She was like a 30-year-old woman. She was so mature.
Yeah.
Now we're in LA. I talked to a grown man the other day, 54. He was like a teenager.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's
exactly.
incredible.
So personal development is optional after puberty.
Yeah,
and a lot of people do not engage in that process.
Hmm.
And the ability to discern who is walking with you is important. So who's actually walking with me and really curating who's around me. So then I experience the world. I shine the light on the types of awareness that are serving my mission. So there's infinite possibility, and that's freedom. And there's also responsibility.
I want to segue. Just as we're getting closer to the end. It's very good. A couple of things we'll do is the idea that Socrates brings up. I think it really encapsulates a lot of the conversation. It's about knowing thyself.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of his main things. He went to the Oracle at Delphi, and that was one of the main messages that was actually sent. And his philosophy, aside from the Socratic method, is really knowing thyself. When we know ourselves better, we are less likely, it's still possible, but less likely to be influenced so much about what the external is dictating. Right? We're not operating out in out. We can then begin to some capacity operate from in out in, where our centers are base. Because if not, if you wake up, you just didn't sleep well for some reason, then you're so upset about everything that comes your way. The neighbor knocks on your door saying, "Hey, I want to clean your place." You may respond in rage, being, "Oh, I didn't tell you to be here. What are you doing?" They just offer you something super nice. But because you're responding to the external versus preparing the internal to then dictate the external,
right,
you now become a subject of things you can't control.
Right.
And then we lose our free will.
Right.
It's this entire thing. So at that point of knowing thyself, and then anything else you want to add here, because I do have 3 final questions.
There's a massive return on investment in our work. There's a massive return on investment in things like traveling, but as you travel, you just meet aspects of yourself that weren't as obvious in the context you're in. So traveling the world and meeting yourself in all these other people and experiences and cultures, massive return on investment. So I love that. And you mentioned a neighbor coming over. This is the same. The neighbors all over the world, right? Go be in relationship. So I think that's on know thyself, and ultimately beginning when I get a read on my negative self-talk or my level of self-worth, my life is defined by my self-worth. So elevating my self-worth, and I talk a lot about that with my clients. If it's for entrepreneurship or just straight up coaching, I do a lot of relationship coaching because all relationships are the same personally as they are in business, as they are in life, as they are with our mission, and it all comes from relationship to self, which is self-worth. So elevating self-worth is so foundational to anything you want to do. You will both have a baseline that you will come back to, but you also have a ceiling based on your self-worth. And when you go above that ceiling, it's so unfamiliar, you often come back. So this is you get wealth and you lose it. You get success and then you crash it. So talk a lot about that self-worth. And then the self-talk, actually in understanding where did we absorb that frame from our friends, our family, our religions, our schools, media, and then getting to the root of it. I'm too much. Like sometimes last night even I was saying, oh, my energy is too high for this space. Like I want to leave. And then I went down and in my men's group, we were talking about negative self-talk, and I workshopped the exact thing. And the insight that I got was, I am just right for this space. Right? I am valued here. I belong here. I'm a contribution. And bringing that in and that tracing the source of I'm too much back to not only in childhood with my brother and sharing a room together, making him uncomfortable, sharing space because he'd been used to having his own room when I was born. And then my father and his father being Italian Americans, that expressiveness was too much for the American culture. So their survival strategy was keep that on the down low, fit in, blend in. So then I inherited that and again repressed my expressiveness. And then I twisted that into this gender expansiveness. But really it's just, I'm an Italian dude. I wave my hands around. I like fashion.
How much we limit ourselves to adapt to the environment, right?
Yeah.
How often can we fight that? That's very good. We'll do 2 separate sets. Of course, just say I'll add it and where people find you and get your information and anything that you'd want to share on that aspect.
Sure. So kodahpip.com. That's KODAH. P is in purple, IP.com. You'll find my whole world there, and there's a little chat bot that can help you find me. And what you say, where they can find me, and
where they can find you, and just anything coming up for you.
Sure. So check out the blog. I'm engaging on that. I'm working on some larger projects in the clean technology space, but I'm very much bringing on new clients for one-to-one work. So I have almost a full roster. I can take on 2 or 3 clients if they're aligned, and you've heard my experience. So right now I'm working with a lot of people who've come through gender and polarity, and if it's their body or their relationships, and helping people integrate that. And I'm also working with folks who have had expansive experiences, most often by psychedelics, and then are looking for integration, but they're high intellectual people. Mm-hmm. So I'm working with lawyers and doctors who have had the psychedelic experience, and they're high performers. So it's not, they want to understand how this integrates into their ontology and frame overall, and I can help integrate the map on that. So psychedelic integration and relationship coaching, kodahpip.com. You'll see all my futurism, all my entrepreneurial strategy, and all of what I just mentioned.
Powerful. Yeah. And then the last 3 we'll answer. It's a question. Just, you can make it 1 word. If you want to put a little phrase, you could. It's 3 of them. More so just come from the heart, not from the head. Life is
adventure and novelty. A gift.
Adventure or novelty, I like that.
Yeah.
People are
family. I am grateful.
Powerful. I like to do this through because it's a lot of identity.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Saved by the bell.
And a guest just arrived. Perfect timing.
Pleasure, man. Thank you, Kodah. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you guys for listening. Until the next one.
All right, take care.
Thank you, bro.
Awesome.
A lot of fun.
Perfect timing.